All right, hello, my name is Clayton Witt, and this is discussion board 3. Today we are taking a look at a couple of documents from the Evans collection that would help us perhaps create a lesson around that would help us explain early American history to students. And so this was a rather interesting discussion to get into because there are a lot of topics that I think would be applicable to this. But for this video, I wanted to look at two documents that examine the question of slavery in colonial America or early America. I think these would be beneficial just as an overview. I think these would be beneficial because one, they are primary source documents. I think there's a lot of students nowadays that aren't directed back to the primary source material in history. That's just a general discussion there, not even just focusing just with American history, but they're not focused or pointed back to the primary source material. And I think that when you get them away from the textbooks and you get them to look at some of the actual documents that people were writing in the past, they'll be much more energized with what they're seeing, what they're learning. Particularly with the question of slavery, I think it's important to understand the various nuances of it in American history. And the fact of the matter is, and quite frankly, there's this underlying assumption nowadays that everyone in colonial America was somehow, an advocate for slavery or some sort of racist slaveholder or something of that nature. But when you point them back to the original documents, you find that there was a lot more nuance to these discussions. Yes, there were people who were avid supporters of slavery, but there are also those that were actually taking very stark stances against the institution, some very prominent figures as well. And so I think when you look at these documents, you'll be able to see that. So I just picked out two from the Evans collection. There are obviously much more that I could go to. The first one here is by William Dillwyn from 1773, titled Brief Considerations on Slavery and the Expediency of its Abolition. And I'll just pick out a little portion here that I thought was interesting. He says, if by royal instructions our governors are prevented the exercise of their own judgments, provincial addresses to the crown would be likely to remove the difficulty. He's talking about the removal of the slave trade from the colonies. The sense of the people conveyed by their representatives to the royal ear on so interesting a subject must prevail with a prince whose virtues have endeared him to his people, although it should be opposed by men comparatively few in number, whose avarice may continue to render them insensible to the common feelings of humanity, in whose God is gain. If we cannot obtain a total prohibition of the importation, we shall certainly be indulged in obtaining it for the colonies which petition for it. Even should we fail here, the conscience satisfaction of having done our duty will be a reward sufficient for the labor. So I read that whole thing there because I think it really showcases the various nuances of the question here. You have the advocating of a redress of grievances against royal governors, and this desire to get rid of the importation of slaves. He's talking specifically about the slave trade here, the importation of slaves. But he goes even further and says that if we can't get a complete prohibition of it, then we can at least perhaps get certain states, or at this point colonies, to render the prohibition themselves. And so we can still have some sort of victory here with doing that. And I think this is interesting not just for the question of slavery in colonial America, but also with its application of government, because what essentially the author here is advocating for is a style of a federalist system of government where you have a position of divided authority between, to use the language of the Constitution, states and a federal national government. And so you see that kind of in origins here, and that's just with the first document. The second document that we have to look at here, and I'll do this very quickly, is by one Benjamin Rush, also from 1773, titled An Address to the Inhabitants of the British Settlements in America Upon Slave Keeping. And he points out, among other things, he says, slavery is so foreign to the human mind that the moral faculties, as well as those of the understanding, are debased and rendered torpid by it. Earlier, talking about the slaves themselves, he says, the accounts which travelers give us of their ingenuity, humanity, and strong attachment to their parents, relations, friends, and country show us that they are equal to the Europeans when we allow for the diversity of temper and genius, which is occasioned by climate. So Benjamin Rush making what we may consider to be very forward-thinking statements there about an equality of man and the fact that slavery has no place in a civil society. Benjamin Rush is significant also because he was actually a signer of the Declaration of Independence. And so when you have a lot of people saying, Declaration of Independence is, a contract with slavery and all this type of things, you have to think about people like Benjamin Rush, who has these strong sentiments, and you have to ask your question, would he sign on to a document that certainly was a protection of slavery? So maybe the question then goes on further to say, maybe we have this assessment of this document all wrong. And so that's kind of a little bit of an understanding there based on those two documents regarding the discussion of slavery in colonial America. So thank you again for watching.